Welcome to the Scholar Chronicles. I'm Dr Loh KS, a historian. In this podcast, I ask fellow scholars to share stories from the field, from their research and the writings they do. These stories are rarely discussed, but I think they are interesting because they shed light on the research we do, the challenges we face, and the relationship between scholarship and society. And the podcast hopes to, by sharing these stories, help us do our research a little bit better. What we're going to do today is to kind of peel away the veil of this quite remarkable book at the turn of the millennium on Singapore history, Lee's Lieutenants. And we'll talk about why the book is important in Singapore historiography and how the book came about. So very happy to have on the show today the two editors of the book, Lam Peng and Kevin Tan. Welcome to the show, Kevin and Peng.
Thanks, Kassim.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I know Kevin quite well. Peng, I have met you once when the book was launched, the second book on the elections. You were there. I don't think I really got to talk to you, but a couple of months ago, I did a podcast on the other channel with Fong Ho Fang, and I came across your name in Breakthrough magazine. And I actually asked Ho Fang to talk a little bit about you and, your long-standing collaboration all those years back. And thanks, Kevin, for, bringing this together. Very happy to, I know both of you have great stories to share. I know for sure Kevin is a great storyteller. Maybe I can ask both of you, for those listeners who are not familiar with Singapore history, to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm a Principal Research Fellow at the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore, Bukit Timah campus. I'm actually trained as a political scientist, comparative politics, with a focus on Japan. In recent years, I've branched out to the Korean Peninsula, and I've actually done fieldwork in PRK in North Korea. Been to places like Pyongyang, Wonsan, Kaesong, climb Mount Kamgang, and went to the DMZ from North Korean side. But of course, I've also been to the DMZ from the South Korean side. So Kevin is a constitutional lawyer. I'm a political scientist. So it's quite interesting that many of the contributors to Lee's Lieutenants are not bona fide historians, but we are all Singaporeans. And we feel that we should adopt a multidisciplinary approach. And for a book like Lee's Lieutenants, we should not just confine ourselves to British archives. And the records of ISD, the records are not freely open to most local scholars anyway. So, yeah. So this is a work of passion. So doing Lee's Lieutenants is not something for us to promote our academic career. One is just a bunch of like-minded young Singaporeans. Then we were young ones, because when we conceived our project, it was in New York City, my apartment, when Kevin bunged over.
We'll get to that story, but I think they need. I need to introduce Kevin.
Kevin.
Myself first, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Kassim, for getting us together for this. My name is Kevin Tan. My day job is really as an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Law at the National University of Singapore, where I teach constitutional and administrative law. I teach a course on the Singapore legal system, and I teach Singapore legal history. And like Peng, I'm not trained as a historian, although I gravitated towards history in quite a serious way for a whole host of reasons, right, including my great interest in legal history. I have also been quite active in various civil society circles. I was once president of a political discussion group called the Round Table, and I've also been previously president of the Singapore Heritage Society, and currently I also serve as the president of the ICOMOS Singapore, the International Council of Monuments and Sites, Singapore chapter.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Peng, were you in the round table as well?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Okay, so both of you had already collaborated. I know that you had a book together on the elected presidency a couple of years before Lee's Lieutenants.
That's right. So for that book, we look at institutions an emerging institution, constitutional change, institutional framework, remaking of the Westminster system. So for the second book, Lee's Lieutenants, we look at the founding fathers. And the third book, which we have not given up, we have been mulling over it, is about civil society in Singapore. So we have it all planned in 87 to have a trilogy. Yeah.
I think just our own personal history, we kind of go back a long way. Both Peng and I joined NUS as very young academics in 1986. Peng had graduated a bit earlier than I had, but he had gone out to work for a year at DBS before
DBS Bank.
coming back.
I did my master's at the Australian National University in International Relations, and both of us were senior tutors.
That's right.
Yeah.
So back in the 1980s, there was this concerted effort by NUS to recruit more locals, and they came out with this senior tutorship scheme. So in a way, both of us were beneficiaries of this particular scheme. So I was recruited straight out of school into the law faculty, and Peng joined the political science department.
So I was at Columbia, New York City. Kevin was at Yale, and he loves classical music, and so do I. And whenever I remember whether going to Lincoln Center or Carnegie Hall, he will bunk over at my place, and in the stupor of the night, we'll talk about Singapore, and then we cooked up this idea. Hey, when we go back, why don't a younger generation of Singaporeans think about their country and make sense of what's happening on?
So when was this? When you were
So
away?
we joined the faculty. We both joined the universities in '86 and taught for a year. So in '87, we were both scheduled to go our separate ways or go to different universities for our graduate studies. So Peng got a place at Columbia in New York where he was to do his PhD. In those days, people in the law faculty were not sent on PhDs. So I got a scholarship to do my Master of Laws at the Yale Law School. And so Connecticut and New York are not that far apart. And so, our friendship in Singapore continued really into something a bit more when we were both in the US. And as Peng rightly pointed out, I love going to New York to watch the concerts, go to the museums and so on. And he was very generous in allowing me to sleep in his living room whenever I go into New York. So I saved some money that way. And like he said, in the middle of the night, I think there was a certain zeitgeist among young scholars at the time. People of our generation who had all kind of joined the universities, where we felt this compelling need to do something about the scholarship pertaining to Singapore. Now, this may all sound terribly naive and idealistic, but we were idealists. We were all young. We were idealists. We had benefited from the system. We'd also seen some of the problems with the academic system and the ruts in which some of the older scholars had gotten into, and we felt that it was time for us to do something. And something collaborative, right? So rather than just work in silos, it was important first to get to know more scholars among our contemporaries, and then hopefully to find a project that we could, collectively work together on. And so we concocted these three book projects.
Yeah, multidisciplinary, generational change. Yeah, multiple perspectives. Yeah. So that's our approach. Yeah.
So I want to open that can of worms, right? So in the mid 80s to late 80s, what were the issues that you see, in Singapore studies, for example? I mean, when was the last book on Singapore studies? There was the Management of Success, right?
That's right.
Was that around that time? That was in the
Management
end of the
Success.
80s.
In fact, yes, I think Yeah, in fact I have an essay in there. I collaborated with Philip Pillay and I have an essay in there. So that was done just before we left.
Yeah.
So that would have come out around 86, end of 86, 87,
right,
I think.
Right,
yeah. Yes. So that would have been the sort of the big thing, the big magnum opus relating to Singapore studies generally at the time. And then I think subsequently there were these surveys that were done I think Beng Huat did one or two collections on Singapore studies, but those were
That's
bibliographic.
later, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
later.
that's a bit later.
Communitarian democracy. I think
Yeah.
he did.
No. I'm talking about the two volumes. I can't remember now. Basan Kapur did the first edition, and then Beng Huat did the second edition.
All right,
And these
right,
were an attempt to sort of aggregate, the sum of scholarship that was extant at the time pertaining to Singapore. So we felt, I think if you're asking about, what were the sort of things that we were concerned about, I think the first thing that we were concerned about was the fact that there was insufficient attention focus on Singapore. And we are Singaporean scholars. The worst thing is that people from Singapore or the region don't write about Singapore, and then we kind of expect, the Westerners to come around and start writing about Singapore. Now, that's not to say that there isn't good scholarship from Western scholars. I mean, far from that. I think many of them have done, admirably. But it is such a pity to expect that, we expect foreigners to come here and study our system and our institutions and our history, if we ourselves don't care enough to do that. And I think that was the, sort of the compelling force behind what we were trying to do.
You were asking us what was the grand narrative of the 1980s. The grand narrative in the 1980s is Lee Kuan Yew as a banyan tree, Singapore, Asian values, debate,
the Singapore story.
Singapore story into the 1990s, quite hubristic, I think. But what we wanted to do is to look beyond a single founding father. We believe that there's a set of founding fathers. So this book, in a way, changed the historiography of Singapore, and we are very conscious that because of age, a number of the founding fathers would no longer be with us. So that's the last opportunity to hear it from the horse's mouth. Okay, and I'm sure, and in fact, indeed, for some of the old guards, their perspectives about the PAP, about Singapore, had also evolved over the decades. As they became, I think, more, pardon me for using this word, more honest when they were no longer cabinet members. They were more candid, they were more reflective, and they did mention about their different perspectives from Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Remember when we did this, when we conceived of this project in 1987, Lee Kuan Yew was still the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And when we did this book, he was the senior minister and subsequently minister mentor. So we took on a fairly different approach to look at his lieutenants, and we are very fortunate. A number of them agreed to meet us, like Mr. Lim Kim San, Mr. Ong Pang Boon, Mr. E.W. Barker. And it's, of course, we do not accept lock, stock, and barrel what is said to us, because we have read what they have written, but it's good to talk to them, to hear their perspectives instead of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's perspective, because there are really multiple perspectives of how Singapore evolved and developed.
Yeah, I think we should also remember that at that time we were just coming out of the big Singapore story, narrative. 1984, we celebrated so-called 25 years of nation building, right? 1959 to 84. Huge exhibition down at the World Trade Center. And that was when the first time you got to hear about the Singapore story. And so there was this state-run creation of this big meta narrative of, and it's basically a repeat of a template which Rajaratnam had actually formulated in the 1960s, right? That there were these two forces, the moderate left versus the radical left, the moderate English educated riding on the backs of the communist tiger, not ending up in the communist tiger's mouth, and then, merger separation from Malaysia, and then, going on his own in this sort of almost heroic, Whiggish kind of narrative. And I think we in a way, well, we took all that in, but of course the skepticism of the scholar remains, right? That look, that cannot be the whole story. It cannot be so monolithic. And certainly, however superhuman Lee Kuan Yew may have appeared to be at the time, you can't attribute everything to just one person, right? So in a way, Lee's lieutenants was an effort to redress this problem. Now, I wanted maybe just a little bit of context because these two books were actually planned in a way together. What we tried to do, you see, before I went off for my studies at Yale, I was actually put on the university's multidisciplinary committee, which I continued to serve in after I came back. And nobody was interested in multidisciplinary studies at all at the university. So we would have to meet, on Saturdays, trying to coordinate efforts by various faculties to work on collaborative projects, but we got nowhere with it. I think my singular contribution to that committee ultimately was to suggest that we should shut ourselves down, which we did, right? Because, I mean, it was kind of difficult, right? Trying to drag colleagues into this enterprise when most of them were quite content to work within their disciplines and their silos. That's when we decided, well, we can't depend on institutions to do this for us. We can't depend on institutions to, sort of force people to work together. So why don't we make use of our own networks, contemporaries of ours, right? We knew people in the history department, in sociology department, in econs department, and so on. People who could easily work together, if nothing else, because they were friends and acquaintances of ours.
Yeah. And to be fair to our contributors, it's not, no doubt we are co-editors. And this book was possible only because we had contributions from our esteemed contributors. There's Hong Shandy from History Department, Kok Kian Boon from Sociology, Tilak Doshi, who is an economist, Hong Lisa, historian,
Zoraida
Ibrahim was with Straits Times then. She's with South China Morning Post now. And Lee Wan Ling. Lee Wan Ling was my classmate for many years. Wee Wan Ling. He was my classmate at ACS for many years. And he wrote a very interesting chapter, which some people deem to be a bit of subversive. He made the argument that Lim Chin Siong was never a Lee's lieutenant. He was a peer. He was an equal in certain aspects, more than an equal to Lee Kuan Yew. And Lim Chin Siong and company actually played a very important role in the decolonization of Singapore. And Wan Ling argued that Lim Chin Siong was a lieutenant of Singapore and not a lieutenant of Lee Kuan Yew. We got a way to sneak Lim Chin Siong into our narrative.
Kevin, you have the book with you, right?
Why don't you show it? Lefties and the supporters,
All right, this is the first iteration of it, the hardcover copy, which is quite rare. And there's a little bit of a story how we ended up getting this book published. But if I may, with your indulgence, return to the narrative of these two projects together.
Yeah.
We initially thought among ourselves which book would we push out first. And the one that was most ready and most topical at the time was Managing Political Change, because we had just recently been following up all the debates on the elected presidency. And in 1991, this was constitutionally entrenched. So we thought this was a much more topical subject, and we would want to try and get that book published first. And if you remember, Peng, at that time, we tried to get it done through the Center for Advanced Studies at NUS, right? Through Chin Kin Wah. And we had a bit of a problem because I think we were victims of some internal squabbles within the arts and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, so much so that Kin Wah came back to us and he said, look, we can't get anybody to take your book. Nobody's interested. At which point, being the young, brash, arrogant that we were, we said, never mind, why don't you just give us the book back and we'll go touting the the book for, we'll go and find our own publishers, right?
Okay, just a different perspective. I'm unaware of any internal differences within Center of Advanced Studies. But what I know is the editor for the Asia series on Routledge, Michael Liefer, who is really an old hand on Southeast Asian politics, happened to be an old friend of mine. So when the cooperation with CAS to do this book didn't work out, I approached Michael Liefer, and Michael Liefer said, hey, this is interesting. No? New institutions is something different from Westminster system. It's an evolution or a revolution, depending on your point of view. So he said, give me the book. And he did it.
Actually, yes. I was going to come to that part because, thanks to Penger's, connection with the late Michael Liefer, Michael was actually interested in the book, but at first we were circumspect, right? We were not sure that he would actually take on the book.
Seems very narrow,
right? Because he was editor of series editor of the Routledge in Asia series, and so we thought, okay, why don't we tempt him? Let's tempt Routledge with more, and so we suggested actually to take both the books. Why doesn't Routledge take both Managing Political Change as well as Lee's Lieutenants? We thought that Lee's Lieutenants would be a sweetener because we thought that would sell more copies. And interestingly, Routledge said, no, we want Managing Political Change. We don't want Lee's Lieutenants, right? So we were like, okay, you don't want Lee's Lieutenants. Okay, we'll have to go shopping for someone else. And it was fortunate at that time. The local distributor for Routledge was APD Singapore, Ian Pringle, who's become a good friend of mine. So Ian at the time said, look, if Routledge doesn't want it, please don't send it to anyone yet. Next week, right? He said next week, Patrick Gallagher of Allen and Unwin will come to town. You come to Singapore for some meetings, and I'd like you to try and get him to publish this book. And so that's exactly what happened. Patrick Gallagher came to Singapore. I remember we had a meeting in my office at Kentridge, and Patrick was like, "Yeah, let's do it, right?" And so we then did the formalities and sent the proposals and so on. And that's how one book went to Routledge, and then this other book came out under the imprint of Allen and Unwin, right? And this is how the two books ended up. Right. And of course, we were also quite fortunate in the publicity for this book because one of our other good friends was or is actually Sharon George, who was then writing for the Straits Times. And so he decided that this book was important enough that it warranted some kind of serialization. So they ran long extracts over several weekends, right? I think two weekends. 2 weekends, I think.
Yeah, it was on the front page, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was very nice. He said, "This is the book we've all been waiting for," and then
it was on the front page of the Straits Times actually. Quite incredible.
Let me go back to the beginning of the book, right? When did you conceived it in 1987? When did you start working in earnest on the book?
After I'm back from Japan in 1994, because I left New York in 1990, went to Yokohama and commuting between Yokohama and Tokyo, because I went there first year for my Japanese language training, and then to Keio University Mita campus in Tokyo. So I was back in Singapore in 93, defended my dissertation in 94, and once I got my PhD, Kevin and I.
Actually, maybe just a year later, because when Penger got back in 94, I was scheduled to go off on sabbatical to finish up my own doctoral thesis, my JSD. So I got back in 96. So that's roughly when we began.
But we worked on the managing political change, elected presidency first, before moving to Lee's Lieutenants.
Right.
So it was actually a very tight timeline, no? Managing political change came out in 97, and Lee's Lieutenants came out in 99. The reason why we can do it so quickly was because I think Kevin is a slave driver. He cracked the whip, and the contributors were good, and everybody, young and energetic, were driven with a mission to say something interesting, and we got it out in 1999. No?
I think there's also something to be said working with friends who are also very good collaborators. It's just beyond, say, a deadline. Right? You can actually persuade people to reach beyond themselves. I distinctly remember this, and I much regret losing that particular copy. But our friend Wang Jianli was actually on sabbatical in Nanjing, and he didn't have modern facilities, email and all that, and he actually hand wrote in pencil the entire chapter, right? which I mean, I had to type out because it was handwritten. So he sent it to me. It was this thick stack, right? I think it was something like 90 pages handwritten, and I had to type it all out. But this was the kind of things that we were doing in those days, just to sort of get the book out. Huh?
Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about, the contributors. How did you choose your team? Were they all friends in that sense?
Yeah, actually, all the friends, most of them are in the arts faculty. So I know them personally and introduced them to Kevin, and everyone seemed to get along.
Well, I think if I'm looking at the list now, Peng is absolutely right. Many of them were contemporaries of his in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So, of course, there was Jianli, Tian Woon, Lisa, and then and Jianli brought in Sai Xiumin, who was then his student, actually, research assistant.
Yeah.
Wan Ling, of course.
Wan Ling was my classmate.
And then actually for econs, we had a bit of a problem. We were looking for somebody to do the economic chapter on Goh Keng Swee, and several people turned us down, but someone suggested Tilak Doshi, whom we met for the first time in the midst of doing this. And Tilak actually was wonderful because he also brought in Peter Koklanis, who is a well-known historian as well.
Economic historian.
Yeah, that's right. So that's how we sort of pulled it together. You could say it's opportunistic. You could say it's low-hanging fruit. People we know well, we corral them, and we turn on our charm or crack the whip, whichever way you want to put it, and we somehow got it out.
No, I mean, completely understand. That's how you get projects together, right?
Exactly.
What I want to ask is, there are no traditional political historian in there, right? The Ernest Chu, Edwin Lee, they are not there. Albert Lau didn't contribute. Jianli and Lisa are good, excellent historians, but they are more like public historians, right? Did you approach any of the political historians?
What's interesting is that Lisa is she's a specialist on Thailand. So she can actually sing the Thai protest songs, of the student movement of Thailand and so on. She's a bona fide scholar in Thai history. Jianli
is a
Republican China. Was on Republican China. He was together with me at the Australian National University. I actually read his PhD dissertation, before he submitted it. So yeah, right. We didn't approach any historian working on Singapore. Yew Kim Hwa left. And Yew Kim Hwa, he's such an interesting guy. He actually told me it's actually not quite safe to work on Singapore history. If I were to stop at 1954 or there,
59,
it's okay, but 59 is a bit dicey, it's a bit risky,
I had an earlier conversation with Yew Kim Hwa, who is at the time sort of the political historian, and I just come back from Yale, and I was trying to get some pointers on the writing of sort of political history. Of course, I was interested in the legal dimension, but you can't run away from the politics. And he was very reluctant to talk to me at first. And finally, he granted me an audience. And the one abiding thing that I remember from that conversation is exactly what Peng said. He said, "Young man, remember, you want to write history, don't go beyond 1959. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay. That's the beginning of Lee's lieutenants. If you won't go beyond 1959, I'm going to find somebody else who will go beyond 1959, right? Yeah. And Edwin, of course, we've known, but rather reclusive character.
Yeah.
I think Ernest was very busy being
No, he was the dean. He was
head and dean. Yeah.
Yeah. Busy. Edwin Lee, he wrote good stuff like Tauques of Sarawak and so on.
And the British rule, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So they were very much empire historians. No? Empire historians. They conscientiously go through the British archives at Albert Lau.
I think we talked to Albert, but Albert was a little
And I think
skeptical, right?
Yeah. Never. I don't think we really had in mind
Okay.
Albert, because Albert is an empire historian.
Yeah, actually,
British
I
archive.
don't know who we did talk
Yeah.
to. We talked to Taeyong, who was also a
right.
contemporary of ours. Yeah.
Mm.
But I think Taeyong was said that he had much more something really important to do, which ended up being his book on Greater Malaysia. I think he was at that time very busy working on that particular volume, right?
Merger, right? He was working
The one, on
merger. Albert did work on Moment of
merger.
Anguish, which was a separation of Singapore from Malaysia. But Albert did join me on one occasion where I went to meet Toh Chin Chai. Because I know Toh Chin Chai personally. He invited me to join his grassroots organization when I was working for DBS Bank in Rochor. Because the constituency of Dr. Toh Chin Chai was Rochor constituency. Okay, so he invited me to join his management committee. I passed through I was cleared by the People's Association that I'm not a communist. And so I was actually helping Dr. Toh Chin Chai run the community center at Rochor branch. So I visited him quite often, informally, had beer with him. And I have a first-hand experience on how the former chairman of the PAP thought about the formation of the PAP and how it evolved. And very interestingly, some things which I will not even mention to you in this podcast, his relationship with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Okay. That's maybe for another day.
Let's talk about that. The field work and the research. Who were the ex-ministers that you managed to interview?
You see, here we were very lucky because of Peng actually. We actually capitalized on the fact that Peng's father had actually been security officer to many of these old guard, right? And I don't think we would have had the kind of access to talk to them. Ong Pang Boon was the most reticent, actually.
He's very reticent.
Eddie Barker, of course, gave us plenty of time, largely because of his fondness for Peng's late father as well. So, in a way, how we decided to, again, opportunistic, right? If we could get access, we would. We tried very hard to get access where the paper trail is very thin. So, for example, in the case of Goh Keng Swee, there were no interviews carried out. But there is more than enough stuff written by Goh Keng Swee or written about Goh Keng Swee and analyzing his work that we did not feel it an absolute need to interview him. Besides, he had this reputation of being extremely laconic at interviews. She just say yes, no, and then that's it, right? So
in 97, 98, I wonder that was really early onset of dementia.
Well, access was extremely hard.
Yeah.
But with Rajaratnam,
dementia.
You already had early onset of dementia by then.
Okay.
So that would have been impossible. But again, Rajaratnam was somebody who had a huge paper trail. Right? So those people were not that difficult to fathom. The difficult ones would have been the Malay mass mobilizers.
The writer spoke to.
Yes, she did. She was able to get some of them.
Check Yun Tong was incommunicado, refused to talk to anyone. Totally. So
we tried to get it through him, through his son, Ken Jin and all that. But
Lee Kuan Yew could not stop talking.
Oh, Lee Kuan Yew, we were supposed to talk to him for like 3 hours, and then we went
on and on.
Ended up having lunch and almost dinner with him. And then it ended with him offering to take us to Betong to meet the plant. So
Communist Party, for your younger listeners.
Pang Chuan Pi, right? He actually offered us and said, "Oh, this man, I know him very well. I had him as my pillion rider, and I helped him escape. You want to go and see him in Betong? I'll bring you there."
Right,
He
right.
didn't take up on that. So
Uh,
who we decided to interview,
yeah.
first of all, was, like I said, first opportunistic. And thanks to Penger's father, we were able to access quite a number of them, including Lim San, actually, who was
Lim San was through Cherian. So
Chariot.
Cherian gave me the name of his personal secretary. I approached his personal secretary, and Mr. Lim Kim San very, very kindly agreed to meet us, 2 occasions.
Yeah.
Twice,
And he was very candid, actually.
Yeah. And he showed us some papers, which he told us not to reproduce. We are not allowed to make copies of them. His private conversations with Lee Kuan Yew about separation.
Yeah. This is Penger, right? Penger had to go and brought him. He went and provocatively asked Lim Kim San. He said, "Oh, we hear that you are somebody who can plumb the depths of a man's character. So, what do you think about Kevin and myself?" And I was so embarrassed sitting there because I'm like, no, we're not here to ask him these kinds of questions, right? But he was very open. He actually said, well, I wasn't assessing you for anything political, but I think the two of you are very serious scholars. And as
It's an icebreaker. Yeah,
and as a good
icebreaker.
act of faith, he actually dug out a few top secret files that he had in the safe. And he said, look, you can read it here, but don't take any copies and don't talk about them.
Okay.
But it shows you that what I said is absolutely true. So that was basically the interview with Lim Kim San. So people with low paper trail opportunities, and then we work with what we could. I mean, some people, impossible to interview. I mean, by that time, Chin Song had passed away. Actually, in '96, he had passed away, and so that would have been impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. So were the interviews, as far as the aim of the book, right, to bring out this, the equals together with Lee in his cabinet at the time, were the interviews useful, right? Were they enlightening? Were they candid to talk about what they had done in relation to Lee Kuan Yew?
I think most of them were rather fruitful, I would say. They're not all equally fruitful. Eddie Barker was amazing. Very colorful. And actually, we met him about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Actually, and he was very open, right? And that was very helpful. Ong Pang Boon was a little reticent. Not easy to try things out of
He
him.
rarely gave interviews.
Yeah,
In fact, not at all. I think our interview with him was indeed
quite unusual.
very rarity.
Yeah. Some things we already knew, but of course, to be able to hear their personal voices, right? There's certain spin or twist or their versions of what happened. I think that was very valuable in each of us crafting our chapters. To hopefully capture the mood, the essence of what was really going on in the minds of these people.
Right.
I think it's only fair that we give the lieutenants their own voices, right? Rather than to view them through Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I'm sure Mr. Lee Kuan Yew have his own perspectives. He had his own experiences working with them. But it's good for the readers to make up their own minds. Who are they? How did they feel? How did they change? How did they evolve?